All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've heard some great presentations today, and we hope that you will enjoy ours as well. We are some of the speech therapists here at AZA United. My name is Ally Malone. This is Emily Heisler, and we're going to be presenting to you today on AAC in the home and specifically a caregiver or parent's role in promoting success with those AAC devices.
Just a little bit more about us, what makes us qualified to give this presentation today. I received my bachelor's in speech and hearing sciences from the University of New Mexico, and then came back to Arizona to pursue my master's in communication disorders at Arizona State University. I've been working in the autism field since 2011.
And I received my bachelor's in psychology from the University of Michigan and then got my SLPA certification from NAU. And I have been working in the field since 2014. Okay. So give us a sec. Let's see. Next slide. There we go. Okay. Now we would like to know a little bit about you guys. So there's going to be a poll put in the Teams chat if you could just answer these two quick questions. So we just kind of want to know who we're talking to today in regard to AAC devices. So which statement best describes your current relationship to AAC? If you would like one, you have one, you just got one, or maybe you've had one for a long time, and then which program your child is currently using. So we'll give a minute for everyone to answer, and then we'll just take a peek at the results because that will help us kind of, guide some of what we talk about, just knowing what your guys' interests and needs are. Okay. So
Give you just a minute to fill that out, and then we'll go over the results.
okay. That one. It looks like I see one question, Erin. Do we have both? Okay.
This is for me to view it. I need to join to see that.
Mm. We've got a few. Yeah, go ahead if we can check those out, just for us to know. Okay.
All right.
So it looks like we've got pretty split between my child does not have a device, but I'm interested in getting one, or I've had a device for a long time and I want to learn more ways to incorporate it. So we will definitely touch on both of those things. And then we've got, it looks like a lot of touch chat users and some Proloquote to go. Can you scroll down? And then some of you whose child does not have a device.
Okay.
All right. So thank you guys. That will just kind of, we will definitely direct some of what we're talking about to those needs that you guys have. Oh, now I've lost my control. There we go.
All right. So just a brief agenda. What we're here to do today is discuss an overview of AAC. We're going to highlight the parent or the caregiver's role in the process, and then we're going to discuss best practices and what it looks like to implement AAC. And finally, we'll leave you with some real life strategies that hopefully you can take home and implement today.
Okay, so getting started with just a brief overview of AAC, especially for those of you who don't have a device and maybe don't know a ton about them. So what is AAC? Stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So augmentative meaning to add to one's speech, alternative meaning to be used instead of speech. So I want to point out the word augmentative because that one is really important. A lot of people sometimes have the misguided assumption that if my child does have some verbal abilities, is able to say some words or repeat some words, they don't need an AAC device. So understanding that it's not necessarily always a replacement for verbal speech, but can be used to add to one's speech if verbal speech is maybe not a really reliable source of communication. So just understanding that, a ton of different children can benefit from it. And along those lines, I want to mention total communication. So that's the approach. We'll talk about it more later as well, but that's the approach that we're going to take even when implementing a new device, because, and what that means is that we're going to honor and accept all modes of communication, because if the device is new, I'm sure our child has been, getting by with gestures or signs or, verbal approximations, something like that. And we're going to continue to, honor and accept those forms of communication while we're working on the device. Just because we have a device doesn't mean it's our only method of communication that is used or accepted. So we'll touch on that a little bit more later, but that's what we mean when we say total communication. And then who uses AAC? So people of all ages who some or all of the time cannot rely on their speech. So it can be, like I said, augmentative or alternative. And this can be due to congenital conditions like autism, cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, apraxia, or maybe it's an acquired condition like ALS, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, a stroke. And these can be a permanent addition to someone's communication, a lifelong tool, or just a temporary aid. So that could look like somebody having throat surgery and maybe for a few weeks they're unable to speak. And so they could use some form of AAC to help them until, they recover, and then they likely won't need it anymore. And then the types of AAC, so we divide it into two types, unaided and aided. So unaided would be without the use of any external tools, and aided would be with external tools. Unaided is stuff that people might not realize counts as AAC, because all of us use some of them, right? Gestures, facial expressions, sign language counts because you don't need anything but yourself and your body to use it, right? And then aided is divided into two categories. So those could be low or light tech, which is going to be a lot of paper-based types of communication. So somebody could write or draw to communicate, or a communication board with symbols or letters. A lot of times this looks like just a paper version of your AAC device. And then high tech is going to be obviously what we focus the majority of our presentation on, and what I'm sure you guys are here to learn about. So that is those apps or those iPads or tablets that have the communication app on them, or maybe a computer with a voice, something like that. So that is how we divide up the categories of AAC, but we'll focus on the high tech today.
So in talking about those speech generating devices, they use applications or programs. These four are common ones. You guys reported that TouchChat and Proloquo, the two on the left, are the ones that most of you are using. You can see that they have some similarities. There are some differences. Something to keep in mind, this is just one vocabulary size for each of these. They have different sizes. So maybe your child's or ones you've seen look a little different than this, but we just like to show in general what some options might be out there, or what maybe you haven't seen before. So in an AAC system, we should always make sure that it's balanced, robust, and personalized. So this is the responsibility of the evaluator to determine what's going to be the best fit for the child. Balanced meaning it has a variety of different functions of communication that the child or the individual can express. It's not just for protesting or requesting. They can have social commentary, they can describe something, they can tell jokes or opinions. Robust, meaning that there's a lot of language on the device. So these programs typically come with about 5,000 words stored in them. And that's so important, because if you think about all the different things that we have to say in a day and the ways that we say them, we need a large, robust vocabulary to be able to access that. Ally's going to touch on core words and fringe words in the next slide, but I do also like to mention it's important to have access to an alphabet or a keyboard. Because there are 5,000 words, you may think, I don't need access to that. I can say everything I need to say. But maybe there's the name of a movie or a specific food that's not in the device that we want to be able to talk about. So that is helpful as well. And then personalized is also very, very important for gaining buy-in from not only the child, but the family and the community. So, personalizing things about them, people they like to talk about, or places they like to go, foods, activities. Maybe there's certain phrases they really like to say, like, ew. Personalizing those things helps bring buy-in and helps the individual get so much more excited to communicate with the AAC device when it's brand new.
Okay, so Emily briefly mentioned core and fringe, so I'm going to quickly explain what those mean because we'll just hear us kind of refer to those a little bit more while we talk. So out of the 250,000 plus words in the English language, only 200 make up 80% of what we say every day, and those are going to be your core words. So you can see some examples. It's a lot of those little words, right? Verbs, adjectives, prepositions, pronouns. And they can get easily looked over because they maybe feel less important in a sentence, but they're really powerful and flexible because we can combine them in all sorts of ways and use them in a ton of context throughout the day, which is different from fringe, which would be mostly your nouns, things that are easily picturable, right? So they're really easily represented on a symbol system with a very clear symbol or an actual photo. And that can be different from core, which is maybe a little more abstract, which is, I would argue why it's so important to teach because it's not really easy to represent. So we have to teach those. And those fringe words are going to be really motivating. Cookie, McDonald's, all of those. The child's going to probably really quickly understand them, especially with those pictures and symbols. But core can be a little harder, but core is going to take you so much farther because how many ways during a day could we say go versus how many times a day are we actually going to say cookie and have it be meaningful, right? So we will keep talking about core and fringe and definitely the importance of core as we talk about implementing our devices. No. We're having slide trouble. There we go.
All right. So moving into, your role as the parent or the caregiver, if that's who you are today, and what that looks like in getting started or initiating. It sounded like there was maybe 44% of people who didn't have devices, but maybe were interested in that. A lot of times, you may have an outside speech therapist, whether it's through the school or a clinic, and maybe they bring up the idea to you, or maybe it's your idea. Regardless of whether you discuss it with an SLP, ultimately it is the parent or the caregiver's responsibility to initiate the first step. You guys have to get a prescription or a referral from your doctor for an AAC evaluation. You know, you can keep your SLP posted along in the process, and there will be other people that will support you along the way. Whether it's a DDD service coordinator or maybe you'll be in discussion with your insurance company. But we just like to highlight that this is, the place to start. It is actually the parent's role to initiate that first step.
Okay, so now once we've made it past that first step and we have a new device, how should we be supporting it in the beginning? So number one, whoever does the AAC evaluation, following your evaluation, they will offer you training hours. So that can look like a few 1 hour, 1.5 hour sessions. It can vary. But whatever they tell you is available, we really recommend that you take advantage of all the training hours that are offered by them because the person who did the evaluation, chose the device in the system for a reason. And so they're going to be the ones to get it set up and started the way that they recommended that it should be. And then they can spend time coaching, the parents on the programming of the device and setting it up. And then, also begin to discuss some of that implementation and modeling that we're going to do. So, sometimes you have to reach out and let them know, hey, I got the device. I'm ready for my training. And we really recommend that you just take advantage of all those hours because they're offered to you and they're really helpful. And beyond that, it's just going to be about taking the time to familiarize yourself with the device. Right. So we can't just put this in front of a child and be like, okay, now tell me, right? Because it's new to them. They don't know what it means. We haven't assigned that meaning to any of it yet. So we need to be teachers. And in order to be good teachers, we need to be familiar with the device ourselves. Now, you're not going to obviously learn everything. Like Emily said, it can have up to 5,000 words, but just starting to understand some of how you navigate it, where you find things. Ones like Touch Chat and Proloquo sometimes have that predictability built in. So understanding how those work is going to be really helpful so that you can then teach it to your child. And going along with that, familiarizing other important people in the life. So whether that's extended family members, the school professionals, other providers, if you have, ABA or maybe a habilitation provider. And going along with that, those people can attend your training hours. So if there are people who, you're going to rely on to also be helping to implement the device, definitely invite them to those training sessions because everybody is welcome to attend those. And then last is just going to be trying it. So we're going to, spend some time getting ready and familiarizing ourselves, but then we've just got to kind of jump in and give it a shot.
And we know that that can be a little intimidating. We'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like to try it on your end, but I really want to touch on what we can expect it to look like on the child's end when we try it. So we find that this graphic and the mnemonic Eat Cake is really helpful for us and everyone we show it to remember, what this looks like or what we can expect the child to be doing. So at the very bottom, you'll see it's the biggest, thickest layer of the cake, which means it might take the longest time, and that's exposure. So at this stage, the user tolerates your use of the device in their presence, but they don't seem to pay any attention. There's never any expectation of attention being paid. They could be in the other room. Essentially, this is a conversation between you and yourself. And it's just really creating exposure for this new object in their routine. The next stage is acknowledge. So maybe you start to see the user occasionally glancing at the device if they hear something interesting. The next stage would be curiosity. So a little bit similar. You start to see the user watching to see what you're modeling. That interest and curiosity is increasing. The next stage would be try it. So the user starts to touch the device and look for your response. Maybe, they're exploring. I like to call this stage the babbling stage. Some people, maybe people think of it as stimming, where you see a person or a child pressing the same button over and over and over again, and you think it's meaningless. But really, we equate that to babbling in any language, but an infant learning a new language, they have to try it out, they have to explore it. So this is a very important stage, and we never want to reduce their ability to do that. The next stage would be acceptance. So the user expects you to model. They're looking to the device to cue you to model language in the situation. They have fully accepted and they're anticipating that this is going to be involved in their routine now. And then that final stage is really where the user starts to explore the vocabulary themselves. Maybe they're pressing some buttons. Maybe they've started to, kind of pick up the idea of making some requests or some comments. It starts to look more like a conversation. And then at the top, we see that it's icing on the cake if the user joins in at any level. So we know that at that bottom level, we're never expecting the user to join in, but any of those levels above, it's really icing on the cake. We're not expecting it, but we appreciate it if we get it. So that's a little bit about what it might look like when you start to implement this with your learner.
And we did include this cake in the handout so you guys can reference it again, because we just really like this visual and it's helpful to know what to expect. Okay, so now when it comes to your role, we want to talk about changing the narrative that some of us may have about, I have this device and it's my speech therapist's job to help teach my child, which it absolutely is, and that's what we're here to do. But we're also here to teach you guys and coach you so that you can be teachers for your children too. So we like this quote, this statistic, because it kind of really hammers home the idea of the importance of your role. So if the average 18-month-old has been exposed to 4,380 hours of oral language at a rate from 8 hours a day from birth, a child who has a communication system and receives speech therapy 2 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes, they will reach the same amount of language exposure in that AAC language in 84 years. So you can see how 1-2 hours a week of speech therapy, it could take a very, very long time for this device to be functional and a reliable piece of communication for our child. So we don't want it to be seen as they bring that to speech therapy and that's when they use it. It should be a 24/7 thing, right? And that's why we're here to talk about your role, because we're not around all the time. So we want to instill the necessary knowledge and the confidence in you guys that you can also be teaching this to your children outside of speech therapy or school or whatever it may be. So hopefully that kind of, reframes some of that a little bit about why it's so important and why we, value your involvement.
Speaking of, your involvement, we know it can be a little bit maybe confusing about everyone's roles on the team and how those roles overlap. So we wanted to take just a little bit of time to define those individual roles, what makes us similar, and what ultimately unites us all. So parents, your main role is really to take ownership and advocate in addition to modeling. But we really want you to be the case managers. We want you to be the advocates for your individual or your child who's using AAC. We want you to be the one who's spearheading discussions on the progress, the implementation. We really want you to feel empowered to take ownership over that. your speech professional is really going to be the driving force behind new ideas, maybe new implementation techniques, maybe ideas for new pictures, symbols, buttons, things like that. That's where our expertise comes in. And so we're going to collaborate with you on that. We're also going to be responsible for coaching you and the other providers on the team to make sure that everyone knows, what the plan is with this AAC device. The school or other providers, maybe it's ABA or OT or other therapies, their main role and responsibility is going to be implementing the strategies that have been given to them by either the parents or the speech professional, and then asking questions when they're unsure, right? Because this is not necessarily their area of expertise. So we want to empower them as well to feel comfortable to reach out to us to ask questions when they're unsure. And then, of course, we know that all of our roles overlap in some way. So parents, you guys, and us as speech professionals, it might overlap in things like making edits or changes to the device or the vocabulary. That's something that's a very important decision that we want to make together and we want to collaborate on. So we might overlap on that. Parents and other outside providers or school, it's going to be a big responsibility that you guys have to communicate daily. This is going to really help propel progress forward if there's really good lines of communication. And then between the speech professional and the outside providers, it's going to be our role to have interdisciplinary collaboration. We're going to have to, you guys are the case managers. We want you to spearhead, but it's also really important for us to kind of bring that full circle as well and help with that collaboration piece. Now, what ultimately unites us all is modeling on the device and using best practices when we're modeling. So hopefully this gives you a little bit better or clearer idea of kind of how your role fits in with the speech professional and outside providers.
Okay, Emily mentioned best practices. So we're going to talk about what some of those look like. So what is, the most effective way to implement these or the, recommended way? So we're going to start by talking about the mindset that we want to have around an AAC device. So the number one thing is to model without expectation. So that just means we are modeling and using the device without any requirement to respond, without any force to use it, and anything like that. And as we're modeling, we are thinking of what they might want to say, right? Because it's not a question answer machine for us to, have them respond on or, for us to give them instructions, right? We want to be thinking about what they might want to say because it's ultimately their voice. So, I like to kind of say things as I'm modeling like, oh, you look happy, or, it seems like you might need help, right? So that's me making an assessment of what's probably going on and then providing the language with, if I am correct and you did need help, here's how you could say that. So I'm thinking about what they want to say versus, me trying to give instructions on the device, because when you start to do stuff like that, the device is going to feel like work. And that's a really quick way to make it become aversive. We've seen it happen where it was maybe not presented in the best way to a child in the beginning. And now they're like, get that thing out of my presence, because before I was just going about my business. And now every time that comes out, somebody's making me answer questions or they're, grabbing my hand and I have to say something. And that's not what we want it to be for. We want it to be motivating for them to want to communicate. So avoiding things like that and just focusing on modeling without expectation is going to be best practice. So the method, how are we going to implement that? It's called aided language stimulation. And what that means is we are simultaneously selecting vocabulary on the AAC system while we're speaking. So an example, the rule of thumb is going to be one step above our child's current level. So if they're not yet using any single words on the device, it's brand new to them, we'll start with 1. They're at 0, we'll start with 1. So this looks like I'm verbally saying it's time to go to the library and I press go while I'm speaking, right? So you'll notice that we can still speak in full sentences, but we don't have to model every word of a sentence, but we don't need to necessarily, bring our verbal speech down to caveman. Like we're going to still speak and narrate the way that we normally would, and then we'll just pick, one important word out of that sentence to model. Now you'll notice we picked go out of that one. So going back to those core words, out of that sentence, go is going to be the most flexible. We're going to go to the library. We can go to sleep. We can go to school, right? Or we can make our car go. There's going to be tons of ways that we can use that word. So it's a good one to model. Now, if we are starting to use, our child is starting to use maybe one word on the device, we can step it up. And now we're maybe going to do 2 at a time. So I'm verbally saying, let's go see Nana while I'm activating go and Nana. Again, we've got that core word that's going to be flexible and powerful. And then now we've got Nana, it's probably personalized, right? It's probably got a photo of your child's grandma, and that's going to be really motivating too, and clear to them, because they'll see the photo of her and they'll probably get really excited. And now we're making the connection of that button means that person, right? And so we can start to build those associations. So that's how we're going to do it. That's what modeling is going to look like. So when you're going through that cake, right, and we say, you're modeling in the user's presence and all of that, it's just us talking as we normally would, speaking aloud and pressing, one button here and there out of our sentence while we're doing that. And, just doing that all day long. We do it, constantly throughout our sessions. And that is what we talk about when we say modeling.
Now, we know we make it sound pretty simple, but in practice, it may not be. So we just want to touch on some do's and don'ts to hopefully help give you a better picture of that. So we're not going to expect a user to know how to communicate. Now, because I can present a device in front of many of you and you may be able to pick it up relatively quickly, that might just mean that you have really great literacy skills, or maybe you have really good skills in semantic categories. Some of our learners and users don't have those skills yet. So we're going to expect that this is like a brand new language, like they are an infant in this language, and we're going to give them access to a year's worth of language, essentially, before we ever expect them to respond. So the way that we really avoid doing that is just by modeling. We're going to take our focus away from quizzing the child. It's a natural human desire to ask questions, and especially when we want so desperately to know what our kids are thinking and what they know. But like Ally said, we find that if we ask questions when the child is not quite proficient in using the device by themselves, it becomes a little bit aversive, or it becomes intimidating or scary. So instead, to avoid that, we're going to speak naturally, we're going to narrate and model, and we're going to use more statements than questions. So like Ally said, for example, rather than saying, do you need help? You could say, it looks like you need help, and you can model in the same way. We're going to not necessarily use this only for wants and needs. We know that that's a big priority, especially in the beginning with a lot of our individuals, but we're going to focus on teaching a variety of different functions. If we know that it takes a lot of exposure for all these words, we don't want to wait to expose them to these words for later on. We want to start exposing them from the very beginning. It's very important that we don't disregard other means of communication. So this goes back to that total communication that Ally mentioned in the beginning. So like she said, they're already used to getting their needs met by pointing, reaching, grunting, whatever method it is. If we all of a sudden don't accept that and thrust a new device in front of them, that's going to create a lot of frustration. And also, we just know it's realistic. All of us as humans use multiple methods of communication in a variety of different contexts. So we're really going to emphasize a total communication approach. I touched on this a little bit earlier. Babbling is so important. So we know that it may be overstimulating for some of us, or it may feel like it's just playing or it's not serious. But repeated pressing or exploring, navigating through the device, we call that babbling. That's very, very important, as it allows the user time to learn and explore, just like an infant is babbling and learning to explore that language. It's the same in this brand new language for the user. Another thing that we really don't do at all is hide buttons. I always equate this to, it's like putting duct tape on a verbal child's mouth. Once they learn the word iPad, you can't unlearn that word. So they could continue saying iPad until the cows come home, and you really only have a few methods to get them to stop. You could ask them, you could try to convince them. Once we introduce this powerful language to someone who hasn't had access to that before, removing that language becomes a punishment. So it's very important to not hide access to buttons, but instead set boundaries. Okay, I can hear that you want the iPad. It's not time for that right now. The same way that you would with any verbal child. And one caveat being that sometimes when we implement a brand new vocabulary or a system, a speech professional may elect to reduce the array of buttons by hiding them. So we haven't ever introduced it to the child. It's brand new. We've reduced this array to make it a little bit more visually simplistic, to try to get them to understand it a little bit faster or move through the progress faster. So sometimes that is a choice that we make. But again, that's a very different scenario than hiding a button that's already been learned. And then the last thing we're going to avoid doing is ignoring random utterances. Anything that the child says can be meaningful, and we can bring a meaningful context to it. So if you're sitting at breakfast and they say the word football, you don't have to ignore that. You can say, oh, you're thinking about football. Let me go grab your football. And then maybe you show that to them and you show them on the device. So we can always acknowledge and use opportunities to teach meaning to language.
Okay, so now we are going to get into some of the strategies of, real life things that you guys can implement in your home. So we know half of the people here said, I want to learn more ways to help my child with it. So hopefully these next few strategies are going to empower you to do that. So the first one we suggest would just be picking some routine-based times to start with, because it can be really overwhelming when I say, that statistic about how many hours are required, right? It can be overwhelming to try to incorporate that all day long, and that's the ultimate goal. But in the beginning, we can start small and we can pick, some times that maybe feel easier for us as the modelers and the teachers. So we're going to suggest mealtime. It's probably one of the easiest and best times to model because mealtime happens multiple times a day and children are usually seated for it, not always, but it can be, that can be helpful because we have that, engagement there. And it's also probably really motivating for a lot of kids, it's snack time and foods that they love. It can be really exciting. And there's tons of natural opportunities of things to talk about. So we've got some examples. And so going back to the variety of communicative functions, so not just requesting, we can comment or have social exchanges, we can protest, right? There's so many others. But here's a few examples. So some things are going to come up naturally, like the fringe vocab for what we're eating, right? The goldfish, the apple, the cookie, or maybe just, requesting more, requesting to eat, that kind of stuff. Some of those are going to come up really naturally, but then we're kind of stuck at, we've requested more, we've requested goldfish, what else is there? So in order to have opportunities to talk about other things and introduce other language, sometimes we need to just create those opportunities because they might not naturally arise. So we like to say that we need to sabotage the children. So that can sound a little funny, but what I mean by that is we're going to just set up a scenario where there is a communication opportunity. So that could look like a missing item, right? So I bring the child their yogurt and I forgot the spoon. And, we do this all the time in our sessions, and we put on the whole song and dance and you act it out and you say, oh no, mom forgot the spoon. Let's go get a spoon, right? So we're picking the word get as a core word, or maybe we're picking spoon. And you just put on that whole performance. And when we're doing that, there's no expectation that the child is going to say get or say spoon, and that we're withholding the spoon until they ask for it, right? Because they don't know how to say get. They don't know how to ask for the spoon yet. So we're just going to show them that, hey, look, next time mom does that, if you just tell me spoon, this is how you could fix that, right? So we're just giving them that language. We're modeling spoon and then presenting it. And that's how we build those associations of that button equates to that item, and that's how I could ask for it. So that's what that should look like, is we're creating the opportunity to model the language without modeling without the expectation that they will respond. If they do, that's even better. And then another example could be the wrong item, right? So you knew they wanted goldfish and we give them the Cheez-Its, right? And we do the whole same song and dance. No, you wanted something different. You wanted goldfish. I'll go get the goldfish, something like that. Maybe it's a closed container and now we're asking for help and open. And then, we're going to do that for them. A partial amount, you just give them 2 goldfish and obviously they're still hungry. So we can say, I'm hungry. I want more, get more, stuff like that. And there's just a few more examples, some things that may come up a little more naturally, right? Like we can just be commenting on the food while they're eating without having to set up all these scenarios. It could just be those goldfish look yummy, or like the food is hot, cold, sticky, whatever it may be. We can just kind of talk about what's going on. So mealtime is great for that because there's a ton to talk about.
And one thing I might add too is as we start to see more participation with the device or use from the individual, our approach does not change. We don't then start to withhold or expect. We still continue to model without expectation. So just because a child has previously been able to say the word spoon or get one time on their own doesn't mean that they're going to be able to reliably do it the next time, especially under pressure or with high emotion or frustration. So that's just an additional thing I wanted to add that I didn't touch on before. Is it not? clicking.
No, it's not. We've lost clickability again. But it was good. It gave you a chance to add something. Thank you.
Sure
there
did.
we go.
Yeah. Our next strategy is honestly a fantastic strategy, regardless of AAC, but we like to use it as a way to increase exposure to vocabulary as well. And this is what Ally coins as low stakes choices. And this essentially means choices that you're okay with them picking either one. And choices really help the individual feel like they have agency. We know a lot of these kids don't have a lot of control over what goes on in their life. So giving them control in any way we can, small or big, is so helpful. And it really helps them build the association between this activity or this item and this word. And just as a reminder, there's no expectation of participation even in this. We're asking a question, do you want this or that? If they don't answer, we answer for them, or we show them what they could say or how they could say it. So we have some examples. Order of events is one of my favorite things to do. Okay, do you want to brush your teeth or do you want to go potty first? And what that would look like on the device is maybe you model you, or maybe you model potty. You don't have to model both choices. It's just giving them more exposure to that vocabulary. Location is really great. Okay, should we put the iPad in the cabinet or should we put it in the dresser? I find this really helps with transitioning away from things, giving them a choice. Okay, where should it live? Where should it go? In play, simple ones like, should we play Cars or should we play Toy Story if it's a movie? And then clothing is a really good opportunity. It's every single day we do this routine. Do you want to wear the blue shirt or do you want to wear the red shirt? And again, maybe they choose with a gesture. Maybe they glance towards the red shirt, or maybe they point towards the red shirt. We're going to accept that total communication, and then we're going to model red. You want the red shirt. And that's how we'll move forward. But we find that low stakes choices are one of our favorite strategies for giving access to language and reducing frustration just in general.
All right. And then the next strategy is just going to be, if we have this new device, we really should be adopting it as a lifestyle that our family has now. And making it just a part of our daily routines. So this can look like, keeping it charged for sure is going to be one of the number one things, because if it's dead, it's, not going to be helpful to us, and we're losing that access to communication. So if you're, finding it hard to remember to charge it all the time, right? It's another thing that we have to plug in with everything else. Make a plan. Maybe you keep the charger next to where you plug in your phone at night. And so that cues you every night that when you plug in your phone, you plug in the device, something simple like that, that you can just incorporate into your daily life so that we are having that access to communication. And with that, I'm going to skip ahead actually to having it around at all times, right? So if it's dead, it's useless to us. If it's in the other room, it's useless to us. So we're going to want to carry it around. And to our child, if it's brand new, it might just be a big hunk of plastic that they have no motivation to carry around. It might seem like a punishment to be forced to lug this thing with them until it has meaning for them and they understand that it's for their benefit of communication. So we can carry it around for them, right? We don't need to expect that they will want to in the beginning. If they do, that's fantastic. But maybe there's rooms or times in the house where it's not near you. So having light tech. So we talked about those paper-based options. So that can look like a laminated piece of paper that looks exactly like your child's home screen with all those good core words. Or, the bathroom can be a hard place to bring it because these things aren't waterproof, right? So during bath time, it might not be ideal to be modeling. So maybe we print out the bathroom page on the device and laminate that. And then we can still be modeling, during those scenarios, even if we don't have the device nearby. So going back, part of our lifestyle should be that it is seen by our child and everyone else in their life as having one purpose and one purpose only, and that is communication, right? It's not a play device. So we know technology is so motivating for kids, and when they see an iPad, they know how to work it and they know what it's capable of. But if we can have a separate device at home that's used for play, we totally encourage that. But this device needs to just be for communication, because if it's on YouTube, now we've lost our chance to have access to communication, or we've lost any motivation to want to use the vocabulary app because, YouTube's probably better, right? So just having it be seen as this is my voice and that's all it does is going to be your best bet, especially because maybe siblings in the home are going to want to come mess around with it, or, kids at school. So if you have an Apple device, we recommend guided access. If you're not familiar with what that means, You can look it up in the settings of your iPad and how to set that up, but it's basically an amazing feature that these devices come with that will lock your device directly into the vocabulary system, and you cannot press any other buttons. You can't leave it. It does nothing else. It basically becomes solely for that purpose. So if you don't have a like insurance provided device that comes locked, or like those Samsung devices that like can't really do anything else, but you have like an iPad, we would just recommend setting up guided access, and you put a password on it, and then now there is, no expectation that it can be used for anything else. So establishing that from the get-go is really important, because then you'll just be fighting a battle if they think it's for play as well. And then lastly, just, seeing it as a new language in our home, right? Everybody speaks AAC in the home. Everybody can model. We can all respond to any communication that is said on the device. So just adapting it as a new language. Karen.
And then this strategy, while it may seem simple, we know it's maybe not. You guys are busy, but we just like to remind you that you can plan ahead. And so you can notice, let's say you're doing an activity, maybe you're playing cars with your child, or maybe your child likes to play with musical instruments. You can notice what you're already saying during that activity and start to brainstorm what else you could be saying, thinking about, okay, I'm gonna use statements. I'm going to maybe model single words. I'm thinking about core words or functional words. And maybe you just write a little list of both the core and fringe words that you might want to include the next time you do this. And maybe when you have 5 minutes at bedtime or after bedtime, you can look up where those words are and familiarize yourself with them on the device. So that way, in the next opportunity, you feel like you're equipped to model.
Okay, and then lastly, we just have some final tips and thoughts. Just observe your child. What is their biggest communication barrier? For a lot of them, it's protesting. So let's start there. Emily and I always like to joke, but there is truth to it that the first word we'll see a kid independently use on the device is going to be no or stop, because those are so powerful, right? Especially when we're honoring it. So if, we're having a lot of frustration around an inability to protest any other effective way, maybe we start there with things like no and stop and all done. And then, honoring that is going to be important, so that you are assigning that meaning to that word and showing that they can use it to communicate a protest. So if that is our biggest barrier, let's start there. Obviously those fringe words and those personalized words like their favorite foods and their favorite toys are super motivating. So a lot of times kids are going to want to start talking about those. But we really just need to find what resonates with them, because, like I said, communication needs to be motivating. Otherwise, they're just going to probably not pay too much attention to us, right? They're not going to be interested in using the device at all if what we're talking about isn't motivating or interesting to them. So, sometimes we'll be modeling something and maybe it's just it's not interesting to them. So we need to just abandon our own ideas of what we think we should be talking about and try something else and find what is going to resonate with them. And lastly, just, immerse yourself in the culture. Like I said, it's a new language in your home. It's a new thing, part of your life. So the more that you can immerse yourself in it and learn about it yourself is great. So, I'm sure we all spend, well, you're busy parents, but I'm sure we all spend some time on our smartphones, right? So follow accounts on Instagram. We've got a few listed here that we like. And this slide and the 4 strategies before it are also included on the handout. So you guys will have these listed there in the conference packet. But follow some accounts on Instagram. If you're a podcast person, Talking with Tech is a really great one. You can listen to it while you're driving. Or Facebook groups. I really like this one called Ask Me, I'm an AAC User, because adults who use AAC respond to questions. And there's like a whole rule where for the first 24 hours, only AAC users are allowed to respond, nobody else. So that can be a cool way to get the perspective of, an adult AAC user who is also, going through this. So those are just some final suggestions that we have.
Thank you guys so